Success rarely disappears overnight. It fades quietly. It slips away in moments that feel harmless, in decisions that feel small, in habits we repeat daily without questioning them. And that's why so many capable, intelligent, hardworking people never reach their potential, because they aren't talented, but because something invisible is slowly pulling them off course. If you've ever felt stuck, unfulfilled, or frustrated despite working hard, this isn't about motivation, it's about awareness. Because once you see the silent killers of success, you can no longer ignore them. And if you stay with me until the end, you won't just recognize them, you'll know how to stop them before they cost you years of your life. The first silent killer is comfort disguised as safety. Comfort feels good, it feels earned. It tells us you've done enough. But comfort doesn't protect your future. It numbs it. Growth is uncomfortable by nature. The moment we optimize our lives for comfort, we stop optimizing them for progress. And slowly, quietly, we trade potential for predictability. The second killer is the absence of a clear why. When people don't know why they do what they do, they default to what is easy, popular, or expected. A strong why gives meaning to effort, especially when effort hurts. Without it, discipline collapses under pressure. People don't burn out because they work too hard. They burn out because their work no longer means anything to them. The third silent killer is the fear of looking foolish. This fear keeps ideas unspoken, questions unasked, and opportunities untouched. It convinces us that perfection is safer than progress. But every meaningful achievement begins with imperfect action. The fear of embarrassment doesn't protect your reputation, it slowly erases your future. The fourth killer is being busy instead of being intentional. Activity creates the illusion of progress. Full calendars feel productive. But success doesn't come from doing more, it comes from doing what matters. When you confuse movement with direction, you can spend years running fast in the wrong direction. The fifth silent killer is short-term thinking. We are rewarded for quick wins, instant feedback, and immediate results. But lasting success is built on patience, consistency, and delayed gratification. When you prioritize what feels good now over what builds value later, you mortgage your future for temporary relief. The sixth killer is only listening to voices that agree with you. Growth requires friction. Honest feedback challenges identity. Surrounding yourself with comfort opinions protects ego, but starves wisdom. The people who help you grow aren't the ones who always support you. They're the ones who tell you the truth when it's uncomfortable. And the seventh silent killer is blaming circumstances instead of taking ownership. External blame feels justified. It even feels accurate sometimes. But the moment responsibility leaves your hands, so does your power. Ownership isn't about fault, it's about control. You cannot change what you refuse to own. Here's the truth most people never hear. Success is not something you achieve, it's something you maintain. And maintenance requires awareness, courage, and responsibility every single day. These silent killers don't announce themselves. They whisper, they wait, they grow stronger the longer they go unnoticed. But once you see them, once you understand them, they lose their power. And that's why this conversation matters. Because the future doesn't belong to the loudest, the fastest, or the most confident. It belongs to those who are willing to confront the quiet forces that shape their choices and choose differently. If you eliminate the silent killers, success doesn't become easier, it becomes inevitable. Comfort often introduces itself as safety. It doesn't knock loudly. It doesn't demand attention. It gently reassures you that where you are is good enough, that staying still is wise, that risk is unnecessary. And over time, that reassurance becomes a story you tell yourself. At least this is stable. At least this is secure. But what comfort really does is slowly replace courage with convenience and ambition with acceptance. Safety, real safety, is supposed to protect us from harm. Comfort, however, protects us from growth. It shields us from uncertainty, from discomfort, from the possibility of failure. And because discomfort feels threatening, comfort convinces us it is doing us a favor. But the most dangerous thing about comfort is not that it feels good, it's that it feels reasonable. Most people don't give up on their dreams. They simply downgrade them. They don't say, I'm done growing. They say, maybe later. They don't say, I'm afraid. They say, now is not the right time. Comfort provides language that sounds mature, responsible, and sensible, while quietly pulling you further away from the life you once imagined. The human brain is wired to conserve energy and avoid pain. Comfort plays directly into that wiring. Once you find a routine that works, a job that pays the bills, a rhythm that feels familiar, the brain signals relief. It says, we survived, let's not rock the boat. And that signal can be useful when survival is the goal. But survival is a terrible long-term strategy for success. When comfort becomes the goal, learning slows down, curiosity fades, risk feels irresponsible, you begin to confuse predictability with progress. Days start to blend together, not because life is peaceful, but because nothing new is being demanded of you. Growth always asks something from us: time, effort, humility, resilience. Comfort asks nothing, and that's why it's so seductive. The tragedy is that comfort rarely feels like stagnation in the moment. It feels like relief. It feels like finally being able to breathe. And sometimes rest is necessary, recovery matters, but rest becomes dangerous when it turns into residence. When a temporary pause becomes a permanent position. When you start building your identity around staying comfortable rather than becoming capable. Comfort disguised as safety also changes how we make decisions. Instead of asking, what would help me grow? We ask, what would keep things the same? Instead of choosing based on values, we choose based on convenience. And slowly, Without realizing it, we design a life that minimizes discomfort rather than maximizes meaning. Meaningful work is rarely comfortable. Meaningful relationships require difficult conversations. Meaningful progress requires uncertainty. Comfort tells you to avoid all of that. It tells you that peace is the absence of tension, when in reality, peace often comes from knowing you're moving in the right direction, even when it's hard. Over time, comfort reshapes your tolerance for discomfort. What once felt manageable now feels overwhelming. Small challenges feel like big threats. The longer you stay comfortable, the less resilient you become. And resilience, not intelligence or talent, is what sustains success over the long run. There is also a social dimension to comfort. We often stay comfortable because it keeps us accepted. Growth can threaten relationships. Change can make others uncomfortable. And so we stay the same to belong. Comfort convinces us that fitting in is safer than standing out, even when standing out is required to become who we're meant to be. Comfort tells you that you deserve ease before you've earned mastery. It tells you that struggle means something is wrong. But struggle is not a sign of failure, it's a sign of engagement. Every meaningful pursuit involves friction. The question is not whether discomfort will appear, but whether you will interpret it as danger or as direction. When comfort takes over, you begin to manage your life instead of lead it. You react instead of create. You protect what you have instead of building what you want. And while that may keep things stable for a while, stability without growth eventually turns into decay. The cost of comfort is rarely immediate. That's why it's so hard to notice. The price is paid slowly in regret rather than pain, in the quiet realization that years have passed and you are still capable of more. Comfort doesn't take your future away in one dramatic moment. It erodes it one easy decision at a time. Real safety doesn't come from avoiding risk. It comes from building the capacity to handle risk. Skills, relationships, character, adaptability, these are what create true security. Comfort weakens all of them. Growth strengthens them. The irony is that the discomfort we avoid today is often the very thing that would have made tomorrow easier. By choosing comfort now, we postpone discomfort, but we also magnify it later. The conversation you avoid, the challenge you delay, the risk you don't take, they don't disappear. They wait. Comfort tells you to stay where you are because it's familiar. Growth asks you to step forward because it's necessary. One preserves the present, the other creates the future. And the difference between people who achieve lasting success and those who don't is not talent, luck, or intelligence. It's the willingness to leave comfort behind, even when it feels safe, and choose the discomfort that leads somewhere meaningful. When there is no clear why, effort becomes fragile. People can work hard, stay busy, and appear committed, yet feel strangely empty at the same time. On the surface, everything looks fine. Progress is being made. Tasks are being completed. But underneath, something is missing. Without a clear reason behind the work, motivation becomes conditional. It depends on mood, praise, rewards, or pressure. And the moment those disappear, so does the energy to continue. A clear why is not a slogan or a sentence you hang on a wall. It is the emotional anchor that gives meaning to sacrifice. It explains why you are willing to endure discomfort, delay gratification, and keep going when results are slow. When that anchor is missing, even small obstacles feel heavy. People don't quit because the work is too hard. They quit because the work stops making sense to them. In the absence of a clear why, goals become borrowed. They are shaped by expectations, comparisons, and cultural definitions of success. You chase titles, money, recognition, or approval not because they matter deeply to you, but because you were told they should. And when you reach them, the satisfaction is brief, if it arrives at all. Achievement without meaning feels hollow, and hollow success is exhausting to maintain. A weak why turns discipline into a battle of willpower. You force yourself to stay consistent, to push through resistance, to be motivated. But willpower is finite. It runs out under stress, fatigue, and pressure. A strong why, on the other hand, doesn't require constant force. It pulls you forward. It reminds you why quitting would cost more than continuing. When people lack a clear why, they often confuse motion with purpose. They stay busy to avoid asking uncomfortable questions. They measure productivity in hours instead of impact. Activity becomes a distraction from reflection, but eventually business collapses under its own weight and burnout appears, not because too much was done, but because too little of it mattered. The absence of a why also weakens decision making. When values are unclear, choices are guided by convenience and fear rather than direction. You say yes too often. You avoid saying no. You chase opportunities that look good on paper but feel wrong in your gut. And over time, life becomes a series of quiet compromises rather than intentional commitments. A clear why gives coherence to effort. It connects today's work to a future vision. Without that connection, work feels like a loop rather than a journey. You wake up, repeat the same actions, and wonder why momentum feels so hard to sustain. Progress without purpose feels like walking in circles. You're moving, but you're not arriving anywhere that matters. When challenges appear, a missing why becomes especially costly. Setbacks are inevitable. Failure is part of any meaningful pursuit. But without a deeper reason, failure feels personal and pointless. With a why, failure becomes information. It becomes part of the process rather than a verdict on your ability or worth. People often believe clarity comes before action, but clarity often comes from action. The problem is not that people can't find their why, it's that they never give themselves permission to question the path they're on. They stay committed to roles, identities, and goals long after those things have stopped aligning with who they are becoming. And the longer they wait, the harder it feels to change. A missing why also affects leadership and influence. When people don't know why they do what they do, they struggle to inspire others. Instructions replace inspiration. Pressure replaces trust. People comply, but they don't commit. A clear why, however, creates alignment. It gives people something to believe in, not just something to do. At a personal level, a weak why makes success feel fragile. It depends on external validation. Praise feels necessary. Criticism feels devastating. Without an internal compass, self-worth rises and falls with results. A clear why stabilizes identity. It allows you to separate who you are from what you achieve. The danger of living without a why is not failure, it's drifting. Years can pass without deliberate direction. You look back and realize you've been busy reacting rather than consciously choosing. Not because you were lazy or incapable, but because you never paused long enough to ask what truly mattered to you. A strong why does not eliminate doubt. It doesn't remove fear. It doesn't make the path easy, but it gives you a reason to continue despite all of that. It turns effort into service, sacrifice into meaning, and consistency into something sustainable. When you know your why, motivation stops being something you chase and becomes something you protect. You become more selective with your time, your energy, and your commitments. You stop proving and start building. You stop reacting and start leading yourself. Without a clear why, success becomes accidental and fulfillment becomes rare. With it, even the hardest work feels aligned. And alignment, more than talent or luck, is what keeps people moving forward long after the excitement fades. Fear of looking foolish is one of the most powerful forces shaping human behavior, and yet it is almost never spoken about honestly. It doesn't feel like fear at first. It feels like caution. It feels like being smart, professional, or mature. But beneath that surface, it is the fear of judgment, the fear that others will see us try and decide we are not good enough. This fear begins early. We learn often subconsciously that approval equals safety. We are rewarded for getting things right and corrected when we get things wrong. Over time, mistakes stop feeling like part of learning and start feeling like evidence of inadequacy. By adulthood, many people are no longer afraid of failure itself. They are afraid of being seen failing. Fear of looking foolish keeps ideas trapped in the mind. People wait until thoughts are fully formed, perfectly worded, and risk-free before sharing them. But ideas don't grow in isolation. They grow through dialogue, challenge, and refinement. When we wait for perfection, we often wait forever. This fear also delays action. Opportunities come and go while we rehearse outcomes in our heads. We imagine embarrassment, criticism, rejection. And because the brain cannot easily distinguish imagined pain from real pain, we avoid action altogether. The cost is not immediate failure, but long-term regret. Looking foolish is often confused with being foolish. They are not the same. Looking foolish is temporary. It happens in moments. Being foolish is permanent. It's refusing to learn, refusing to adapt, and refusing to grow. Ironically, avoiding looking foolish often leads to the most foolish outcome of all: staying exactly where you are. Fear of judgment shapes careers, relationships, and leadership. People stay silent in meetings even when they see a better way. They avoid asking questions that could clarify confusion. They nod in agreement to avoid standing out. Over time, their voice fades not because it lacks value, but because it was never exercised. This fear also narrows ambition. We choose goals that are socially acceptable rather than personally meaningful. We pursue paths that allow us to blend in rather than stand out. And while this may protect our image, it limits our impact. Growth often requires stepping outside familiar roles and being willing to be misunderstood. The irony is that the people we admire most are rarely those who avoided looking foolish. They are the ones who tried, stumbled, learned, and tried again. Their confidence is not the absence of fear, but evidence that fear did not get the final say. What we see as confidence is often the result of repeated exposure to discomfort. Fear of looking foolish also feeds perfectionism. We overprepare, overthink, and overpolish. We delay sharing work until it feels safe. But perfectionism is not about excellence, it is about self-protection. It prioritizes image over progress. And progress requires exposure. When this fear goes unchallenged, it shrinks our tolerance for uncertainty. Any situation where outcomes are unclear feels threatening. Innovation slows. Creativity declines. We stick to proven methods even when they no longer work, because the risk of trying something new feels greater than the risk of staying stuck. Social media and public visibility have intensified this fear. Mistakes feel permanent, missteps feel amplified. But growth has always been public. Learning has always involved being seen in the middle, not just at the finish. The difference now is that we witness everyone's highlights and hide our own process, reinforcing the illusion that competence should come fully formed. Fear of looking foolish also affects relationships. It prevents vulnerability. We avoid expressing feelings, setting boundaries, or asking for help. We choose silence over honesty. But connection requires risk. It requires the willingness to be seen not as perfect, but as real. The most dangerous aspect of this fear is that it disguises itself as humility. People say they are not ready, not qualified, or not the right person. Sometimes that's true, but often it's fear wearing the mask of modesty. True humility is the willingness to learn in public, to be corrected, and to improve. Overcoming fear of looking foolish does not mean becoming fearless. It means redefining what foolishness really is. Foolishness is not trying and failing. Foolishness is letting fear decide your future. Foolishness is sacrificing potential for approval. Every skill you admire was once performed badly. Every expert you respect was once a beginner. The only difference is that they were willing to look foolish long enough to become competent. They understood that embarrassment is a small price to pay for growth. When you accept that looking foolish is part of the process, fear loses its grip. Action becomes lighter. Learning becomes faster. You stop waiting for confidence and start building it through experience. Fear of looking foolish never fully disappears. But it does become quieter when you stop giving it authority. And the moment you choose growth over image, you reclaim something essential, the freedom to become more than you are today. Busy work often feels productive. It fills the day. It creates motion. It gives the comforting sense that something is being accomplished. Calendars get crowded. Inboxes get cleared. Tasks get checked off. From the outside, it looks like commitment. From the inside, it feels like effort. But effort alone is not the same as progress, and motion is not the same as direction. Many people fall into busy work because it's measurable and safe. It produces immediate feedback. You can see what you did. You can point to hours worked and lists completed. Meaningful work, on the other hand, is often ambiguous. It requires thinking before doing. It involves uncertainty. It asks difficult questions instead of offering quick wins. And because it is harder to measure in the short term, it is easier to avoid. Busy work thrives when clarity is missing. When people don't know what truly matters, everything starts to matter equally. Emails feel urgent. Meetings feel necessary. Small tasks feel important simply because they demand attention. Without a clear sense of purpose, activity becomes a substitute for intention. There is also an emotional reward to busy work. It reduces anxiety. Doing something feels better than doing nothing, especially when the right thing is unclear. Busy work gives us a sense of control in environments that feel complex or overwhelming. It allows us to avoid the discomfort of deep thinking by staying in constant motion. Over time, busy work trains the brain to equate exhaustion with value. Long hours become a badge of honor. Being overwhelmed becomes proof of importance. Rest feels irresponsible. And yet, exhaustion is often a sign that energy is being spent without direction. Meaningful work energizes even when it is demanding because it aligns effort with purpose. Busy work also creates the illusion of progress. Days feel full, but weeks feel empty. You look back and struggle to identify what actually moved the needle. This disconnect slowly erodes motivation. People begin to feel stuck, not because they aren't working hard, but because their hard work isn't producing results that matter. In many environments, busy work is rewarded. Speed is praised over thoughtfulness. Responsiveness is valued more than impact. People learn to react quickly rather than reflect deeply. Over time, reactivity becomes the norm. Work becomes a series of interruptions rather than a pursuit of meaningful outcomes. The danger of busy work is not inefficiency, it's distraction. It keeps attention focused on the urgent instead of the important. It crowds out the time and mental space required for strategy, creativity, and long-term thinking. The work that actually creates value often requires uninterrupted focus, patience, and courage. Busy work makes those qualities difficult to sustain. Busy work also protects us from risk. Meaningful work often involves making choices, setting priorities, and saying no. It carries the possibility of being wrong. Busy work, by contrast, allows us to stay active without committing to a direction. We can always say we were busy, even if we were not effective. There is a subtle identity trap here. When people define themselves by how busy they are, slowing down feels like losing relevance. They become attached to activity rather than outcomes. But significance is not measured by volume of effort. It is measured by impact. And impact requires focus. The shift from busy work to meaningful work begins with clarity. Not clarity about everything, but clarity about what matters most. It requires asking uncomfortable questions. What actually creates value? What can be ignored without real consequence? What work, if done well, would make other work unnecessary? Meaningful work often feels slower at first. It requires thinking before acting. It may produce fewer visible outputs in the short term, but over time it compounds. Small intentional actions aligned with a clear purpose create momentum that busy work never can. Busy work keeps people occupied. Meaningful work moves them forward. One consumes time, the other invests it. One fills the day, the other shapes the future. The cost of staying busy instead of being purposeful is subtle but significant. Creativity fades because there is no space to think. Satisfaction declines because effort feels disconnected from results. Burnout appears because energy is spent without meaning. When people reconnect with meaningful work, something changes. Focus sharpens. Priorities simplify. Saying no becomes easier. Work feels demanding but worthwhile. There is a sense of progress that goes beyond checkboxes and completed tasks. Busy work will always be available. It will always try to fill every gap. Meaningful work requires protection. It requires boundaries, intention, and the courage to choose depth over noise. The difference between those who make lasting impact and those who remain perpetually busy is not how hard they work, but how deliberately they choose where to direct their effort. Short-term rewards are powerful because they are immediate. They offer quick validation, fast relief, and visible progress. They tell us we are doing something right now. In a world that moves fast and measures constantly, short-term rewards feel like proof of success. But what feels rewarding in the moment is not always what creates value over time. And this is where progress quietly begins to erode. Human behavior is deeply shaped by feedback loops. When effort is followed by an instant reward, The brain learns quickly. It associates action with pleasure. Long-term impact, however, rarely provides that kind of feedback. Its rewards are delayed, uncertain, and often invisible at the beginning. As a result, many people unconsciously trade future strength for present comfort. Choosing short-term rewards over long-term impact often starts as a practical decision. We take the option that pays faster, looks better, or feels easier. We tell ourselves we will focus on the bigger picture later, but later has a way of never arriving when habits are built around immediacy. Small compromises repeated consistently shape the trajectory of a life more than a single dramatic choice. Short-term rewards simplify decision-making. They remove the need for patience, trust, and imagination. Long-term thinking requires belief in outcomes you cannot yet see. It asks you to invest effort without guaranteed returns. That uncertainty is uncomfortable, so the mind gravitates toward what is measurable and immediate. Over time, short-term thinking changes how people define success. Metrics replace meaning. Numbers replace narrative. Attention shifts from building something enduring to maintaining appearances. What gets rewarded gets repeated, even if it slowly undermines what truly matters. In work, this shows up as chasing quick wins instead of building strong systems. Processes are patched instead of redesigned. Relationships are leveraged instead of nurtured. Results are optimized for the next report rather than the next decade. Everything looks productive until the foundation begins to crack. Short-term rewards also encourage overreaction. When the goal is immediate validation, every fluctuation feels urgent. Small setbacks feel like failures. People pivot too quickly, abandon strategies too early, and mistake patience for stagnation. Long-term impact requires consistency through periods where progress is not obvious. There is also an emotional cost to living for short-term rewards. Constant stimulation creates dependency. Praise, likes, bonuses, and quick results become necessary to sustain motivation. When the rewards slow down, so does the drive. Long-term purpose, by contrast, creates internal motivation that does not depend on constant reinforcement. Choosing short-term rewards often feels rational in the moment. It can even feel responsible. But over time, it narrows perspective. You begin to optimize for what is visible rather than what is valuable. Decisions are made to protect image rather than build substance. The paradox is that long-term impact often produces fewer rewards early on, but far greater rewards later. Skills compounds, reputation compounds, but compounding requires patience, and patience is difficult in environments that celebrate speed. Short-term rewards can also distort priorities. Effort is directed toward tasks that generate recognition rather than those that create real change. People learn to perform rather than to build. And when performance replaces progress, burnout is not far behind. The habit of choosing short-term rewards trains the brain to avoid delayed gratification. Waiting becomes uncomfortable. Focus shortens. Persistence weakens. Long-term goals start to feel unrealistic, not because they are impossible, but because the capacity to sustain effort has been eroded. Long-term impact requires the courage to be misunderstood. Early efforts may not look impressive. Results may not be immediate. Others may question your choices. Short-term rewards protect you from that discomfort by offering quick proof. But proof is not the same as progress. The most meaningful achievements often look unremarkable at first. They are built quietly through repetition, discipline, and intentional choices. They demand trust in the process rather than obsession with outcomes. When people shift their focus to long-term impact, their behavior changes. They invest in learning instead of shortcuts. They build relationships instead of transactions. They design systems instead of chasing moments. The work becomes less reactive and more intentional. Short-term rewards promise satisfaction now. Long-term impact offers fulfillment later. One excites the senses, the other sustains the soul. The choice between them is rarely dramatic, is made in small, daily decisions about where to place attention, energy, and time. The future is shaped not by what feels good today, but by what continues to matter tomorrow. And the quiet discipline of choosing long-term impact, even when short-term rewards are tempting, is what separates fleeting success from lasting significance. Listening only to voices that agree with you feels comfortable. It feels affirming. It feels safe. Agreement reduces friction, lowers stress, and reinforces the belief that you are on the right path. But comfort is rarely the same as truth, and safety is not the same as growth. When agreement becomes the filter through which you interpret the world, learning quietly comes to a halt. Human beings are wired to seek validation. Agreement tells us we belong. It confirms our identity and protects our sense of self. Disagreement, on the other hand, feels threatening. It challenges our assumptions and forces us to confront uncertainty. To avoid that discomfort, many people surround themselves, intentionally or not, with voices that echo what they already believe. At first, this feels efficient. Conversations are easier. Decisions feel faster. Doubt is minimized. But over time, this selective listening narrows perspective. Ideas become brittle because they are never tested. Confidence grows without competence. And the very certainty that feels empowering becomes a blind spot. When you only listen to voices that agree with you, feedback becomes praise rather than insight. Praise feels good, but it rarely makes you better. Growth comes from tension, from perspectives that reveal what you cannot see on your own. Without that tension, progress slows, even when effort remains high. This pattern affects decision-making in subtle ways. You begin to interpret disagreement as disloyalty or ignorance. You discount information that doesn't align with your existing beliefs. Over time, you stop asking questions not because you have answers, but because questions feel inconvenient. Curiosity gives way to confirmation. Listening only to agreement also weakens leadership. Leaders who surround themselves with yes voices lose touch with reality. They mistake silence for alignment and consensus for correctness. Problems go unspoken until they become crises. Innovation fades because new ideas often arrive disguised as disagreement. On a personal level, selective listening limits self-awareness. We all have blind spots. We all have habits, assumptions, and behaviors that feel normal to us but are visible to others. Honest feedback is how those blind spots are revealed. When we filter out dissenting voices, we protect our ego at the expense of growth. There is also a moral cost to this habit. When we only engage with agreement, empathy declines. We stop trying to understand perspectives that differ from our own. Complexity is reduced to simplicity. People become categories rather than individuals. Understanding gives way to judgment. The echo of agreement can feel empowering, but it is often misleading. Confidence built on unchallenged beliefs is fragile. The first serious challenge can shake it. Confidence built through exposure to opposing views is resilient. It has been tested. It has survived friction. Disagreement does not mean hostility. It does not mean disrespect. It does not mean you are wrong. It means there is more information available. Growth requires the humility to admit that your current view may be incomplete. That humility is not weakness, it is strength. When people avoid dissent, they often justify it by saying they are protecting their peace. But peace that depends on avoidance is fragile. True peace comes from understanding, from knowing that your ideas can withstand challenge. That kind of peace is earned, not protected. Listening only to agreement also limits creativity. New ideas rarely emerge from consensus. They come from the collision of perspectives, from the tension between what is and what could be. When voices are filtered to maintain harmony, originality suffers. The habit of selective listening is reinforced by modern systems. Algorithms show us what we already like. Social circles form around shared beliefs. Over time, exposure to difference decreases. The result is not clarity, but certainty without depth. Breaking this pattern requires intentional effort. It requires choosing curiosity over comfort. It requires listening to understand rather than to defend. It requires the willingness to feel uncomfortable without becoming reactive. Growth begins when you can hear disagreement without feeling attacked. When you can separate your identity from your ideas. When you can say, I may not agree, but I want to understand. That posture creates space for learning. Listening to opposing voices does not mean abandoning your values. It means refining them. It means strengthening them through challenge. Values that cannot withstand scrutiny are not convictions. They are preferences. When you expand the range of voices you listen to, your thinking deepens. Decisions become more informed. Blind spots become visible. Confidence becomes grounded rather than performative. Agreement is easy. Growth is not. But the willingness to listen beyond affirmation is what transforms belief into wisdom and confidence into competence. Blaming circumstances feels natural. It often feels justified. External forces are real and challenges are not imagined. Markets change, people disappoint, systems fail, and life can be unfair. Pointing to those factors can be accurate. But accuracy is not the same as usefulness. The moment responsibility is placed entirely outside of yourself, something essential is lost: the ability to influence what happens next. Taking ownership does not mean denying reality. It does not mean pretending obstacles do not exist. It means recognizing that while you may not control what happens to you, you always control how you respond to it. Blame focuses on what went wrong. Ownership focuses on what can be done now. One keeps you stuck in explanation. The other moves you toward action. Blaming circumstances provides emotional relief. It protects the ego. It explains failure without forcing reflection. When something goes wrong, pointing outward preserves self-image. But that relief is temporary. Over time, repeated blame creates a narrative of helplessness. You begin to see yourself as someone to whom things happen rather than someone who shapes outcomes. This habit subtly weakens confidence. Not because you doubt your ability, but because you stop exercising it. Responsibility is like a muscle. The less it is used, the weaker it becomes. When people consistently attribute results to external forces, they lose trust in their own capacity to create change. Blame also distorts perception. When you believe circumstances are the primary cause of your outcomes, you stop looking for patterns in your own behavior. Feedback is ignored. Lessons are missed. The same problems repeat not because the world is against you, but because nothing internal is being adjusted. There's a difference between explanation and excuse. Explanation helps you understand what happened. Excuse absolves you from learning. Blame often masquerades as explanation. It sounds reasonable. It sounds logical. But it quietly closes the door on growth. Taking ownership is uncomfortable because it requires honesty. It asks you to examine your choices, your habits, and your reactions. It forces you to confront the gap between intention and behavior. That discomfort is the price of progress. Avoiding it may feel easier, but it comes at the cost of momentum. Blaming circumstances also affects relationships. When responsibility is deflected, trust erodes. Others feel unheard or unfairly judged. Collaboration suffers because problems are framed as external rather than shared. Ownership builds credibility. People trust those who are willing to say, "This is on me." In leadership, blame is especially destructive. Teams take cues from behavior, not words. When leaders blame circumstances, teams learn to do the same. Accountability disappears. Initiative declines. People wait to be told what to do instead of taking responsibility for outcomes. At a personal level, blame keeps people emotionally reactive. Every setback feels like proof of unfairness. Frustration builds, resentment grows. Ownership, by contrast, creates emotional stability. It shifts focus from fairness to effectiveness. It asks not, is this fair? But what can I do next? The most powerful aspect of ownership is that it restores agency. Even in situations with limited options, there's always some choice. How to prepare, how to respond, how to adapt. Ownership brings attention to those choices. Blame obscures them. People often resist ownership because they confuse it with self-criticism. Ownership is not about beating yourself up. It is about being honest without being harsh. It is about seeing reality clearly so you can act intelligently within it. When ownership becomes a habit, something changes. Setbacks become feedback. Mistakes become information. Challenges become opportunities to strengthen skills and judgment. Progress accelerates not because circumstances improve, but because response improves. Blame keeps you tied to the past. Ownership pulls you into the present. One replays what happened. The other designs what happens next. That shift in focus is what turns frustration into progress. The irony is that ownership often leads to more compassion, not less. When you accept responsibility for your role and outcomes, you become less judgmental of others. You understand complexity. You recognize that everyone is navigating constraints. Life will always involve factors beyond your control. That will never change. What can change is the habit of where you place responsibility. When you choose ownership, you choose influence. When you choose blame, you choose comfort at the cost of power. True strength is not found in perfect conditions. It is found in the willingness to take responsibility even when circumstances are difficult. That willingness does not guarantee success, but it guarantees growth. And growth is the foundation of every meaningful achievement. Success is often treated like a finish line, a prize to be claimed, a moment when effort ends and comfort begins. We work hard with the quiet promise that one day we will arrive, and once we do, life will finally feel lighter. But this idea turns success into something passive, something to enjoy rather than something to carry. And that misunderstanding is where many people begin to lose what they worked so hard to build. When success is viewed as a reward, it encourages entitlement. Achievement becomes proof that you are owed ease, admiration, or exemption from further effort. Discipline loosens, curiosity fades. The habits that created success are quietly replaced by the belief that success will now sustain itself. But success is not self-sustaining, it demands stewardship. Real success expands influence. Your actions begin to affect more people, more outcomes, more futures. With that influence comes responsibility, whether you accept it or not. Forgetting this turns success into a liability rather than an asset. Decisions made from comfort rather than conscience can undo years of work in a single moment. Success also increases visibility. Others watch more closely. They listen more carefully. Your behavior becomes a signal, not just a choice. When success is treated as a reward, this visibility feels like pressure. When success is understood as responsibility, visibility becomes an opportunity to set standards. There is also a moral dimension to success that is often overlooked. Skills, resources, and opportunities compound over time. The more you have, the more you can do. Forgetting this leads to hoarding rather than contribution. Remembering it turns success into service. Success demands humility, not because humility sounds virtuous, because learning must continue. The moment success convinces you that you have arrived, growth stops, markets change. People change, conditions change. Success that is not actively maintained becomes obsolete. Many people fail after success not because they become lazy, but because they become insulated. Feedback softens. Praise increases. Honest criticism disappears. Without intentional effort, success creates an echo chamber that distorts reality. Responsibility requires seeking truth even when admiration would be easier. Success also carries responsibility to the past and the future. The past effort that made it possible deserves respect through consistency. The future potential it unlocks deserves protection through wise decisions. Treating success as a reward severs this connection. Treating it as responsibility preserves it. There is a quiet shift that happens when people internalize this idea. They stop asking, what do I get now? And start asking, what does this require of me? That shift changes behavior. Choices become more thoughtful. Standards become higher. Impact becomes more intentional. Responsibility does not remove joy from success. It deepens it. Enjoyment that comes from contribution lasts longer than pleasure that comes from consumption. When success is used to lift others, to build systems, or to create opportunity, it becomes meaningful rather than fragile. Forgetting the responsibility of success also weakens character. Comfort tests values more than struggle ever could. When consequences feel distant, discipline is challenged. Responsibility anchors values when temptation appears. The most respected people are not those who achieved the most, but those who handled success well. They remained curious. They stayed accountable. They understood that being successful meant being useful. Success magnifies who you already are. If it is treated as a reward, it amplifies ego. If it is treated as responsibility, it amplifies integrity. The difference lies not in achievement, but in interpretation. When success is reframed as responsibility, fear of losing it diminishes. You focus less on protecting status and more on fulfilling purpose. That focus creates resilience. Even if success changes or fades, the values remain. Success was never meant to be the end of the journey. It is a new beginning with higher stakes. Forgetting that invites decline. Remembering it invites legacy. The people who sustain success over time understand this truth. They carry success carefully. They honor it with effort, humility, and service. And in doing so, they turn achievement into something that lasts far beyond themselves.